I'll just do a quick round the room a little bit first. So, anyone here from Thames Valley? That kind of area? At the back? Yeah, got you. Cumbria? Hi. Who's else on my list? Gloucestershire. Hello. West Mercia?
Oh yeah, got a big
Yeah.
West Mercia
Big
fan.
West Mercia.
Massive.
They were first at the buffet this morning. I saw. We shared a lift. Northumbria? Hello. Greater Manchester? Uh, any London colleagues here? Hi. And Suffolk. Suffolk, no one's one in the room. I just wanted to say apologies. I've been out of the office for 7 weeks, so I haven't been ignoring you. I came back on Monday and I logged on, and you get the glares from the people that have been holding the fort for the last 7 weeks. I think I've made me think that I said the Q word when I went away mid-September. But what I want to do is firstly start off just by saying a huge, great, big thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Stephen summed it up brilliantly when he first came to the stage, but it has been a hellish few weeks for a lot of you. And I made the mistake to Lucy. I made said to Lucy right at the start. Seeing the empty chairs, it's almost like seeing colleagues we've lost in battle over the past few weeks, as we've tackled some of the issues that we've had to do. So, just on behalf of all of us at DLUC, all of our government liaison officers who are there with you when emergencies happen, our Secretary of State, who's not only the Secretary of State for DLUC, but he used to be the Secretary of State in charge of resilience at the Cabinet Office, so he gets local resilience, he gets places, and all of our ministers. At the outset, I just wanted to say thank you. Second apology, I've been looking forward to wearing my EPS pin today. I've had it for 3 years. I really, really wanted to wear it. Still in my bedroom drawer. So apologies. So just imagine me wearing my EPS pin with pride. Thanks for that introduction, Lucy. It's always great to be following Zonia because it's important to hear about the overarching context about how we are working at the national level. She didn't steal my chips, thankfully. I will be touching on some of the things that Zonia said, but going into them in a little bit more of a detail from a local point of view. It's easy sometimes to look at government strategies and find them ephemeral, or so top level that it's difficult to understand how they relate to real life. For those of you who have never met me before, give you a little bit of an introduction. I'm what they call a DLUC lifer for my sins. I've spent just over 20 years working to strengthen local government, local communities in that department. Throughout all of its name changes, one of which I'll come on to later. So I started my career in a government office in Guildford, recommending decisions on complex planning applications. I remember going from a Yates's Wine Lodge at 3 a.m. on a Friday afternoon, Friday night, to a government office overseeing planning appeals on the Monday. And when we talk about culture shocks, that's one hell of a culture shock to go to for a lad in his 20s. Some of the things that I've worked on gypsy and traveller policy, balancing the complex relationship between the settled and the travelling communities. I've program managed community cohesion back in the days when we tried to measure happiness. I've worked on housing policy, some of the leasehold and private rented sector things that we're seeing in the press at the moment in today's King's Speech. And years working with local government to make sure that services still ran despite all the pressures that councils face. Now, throughout all of these posts, our job in DLUC has been to ensure that Whitehall sees life through the lens of the places people live in, people work in, and where people raise their families. So to ensure that when government ministers decide new policies, for example, about how to strengthen the resilience of the UK, our Secretary of State understands your point of view, to understand how they will work in practice, to make sure that decisions that are made in Whitehall aren't made in an ivory tower in Whitehall, but understand the views and influences of all those who work in the field across local government, across communities, across the emergency planning sector, to make sure that you are represented around the COBRA table. As Zonia and colleagues in the Resilience Directorate and the COBRA unit can attest, you know, we are there with our hands up in the air saying, this is how it will feel in real practice. This is what you have to take into account when you make the decisions about how to respond. And it's why DLUC has been the natural home of local resilience policy, working hand in hand with our Cabinet Office colleagues. We get place. We build those relationships. We try to be that active voice for local communities in the heart of government. And there's a reason why I'm starting off by being a little bit personal about my career up front. Because for the last 11 years or so, I've specialized in resilience. Like Zonia said earlier, always keeping coming back to it. I joined RED when it was shiny and new, worked out, when we were still trying to work out how that relationship between central and local systems should work, testing it out, learning from mistakes. And even when I left, as I said, went off and did these other things, housing policy, ministerial support, working in Parliament, always returning to help manage one crisis or another. Finally returning to the fold to Chief of Staff when we prepared for our exit from the EU, coming back again when COVID broke out, and then just sticking around. Because I loved the world that we work in. If DLUC, I nearly made the mistake then referring to DCLG, which is at least 2 departments ago. We've all been there, I still have to catch myself. But if my department is all about partnership working, then the multi-agency partnerships within LRFs exemplified the best of what can be achieved. I believe the UK resilience framework is fundamentally the most exciting thing to happen to resilience since the Civil Contingencies Act. So when I was asked, I was head of resilience for the East of England, London, and the South East. So pretty much working with government liaison officers over pretty much half of the country. But when I was asked to lead the implementation of the local aspects of the UK GRF, yeah, you bet I said yes. Because everything that I mentioned so far is only part of its potential. Housing, community cohesion, local economic growth, stronger democratic functions of local government, it's all connected in the UK GRF, and it's exciting. For the first time, emergency planning, emergency management, the resilience of our towns and places is being recognised as a key component of local placemaking. And I wanted to come to you today because I wanted to share some of that excitement that we've got in the department for making this a reality. We call our plans the Stronger LRF programme, but in reality, we're talking about stronger placemaking, stronger communities, places that you can stand up and say, you can throw anything at us and we'll bounce back. Places that say you can invest in our towns, you can invest in our high streets, because our economy will thrive whatever the future brings. Places that say we have a plan and it goes beyond anything we've ever done in the past. In short, places where no person is left behind just because an emergency has occurred. Where everyone has the same opportunities, despite the risks that they face. Where investment can grow because risks to disruption are minimized, recovery is swift, and life goes on. And I mentioned our name changes for a reason. Because when we talk about leveling up, that is what we mean. Where everyone has the same opportunities despite the risks that they face. Where investment can grow because risks are minimized, recovery is swift, and life goes on. Leveling up in a nutshell. The clicker works.
Hey.
So I wanted to focus on those aspects today. I want to take the concept of the UK GRF that Zonia has explained so well so far and explain how we're going to make it real over the next 7 years. I'm going to give you an overview of the principles behind the 3 pillars of our reforms. These things always come in 3, you know this by now. and tell you how we got there. And I'm going to introduce you to our 8 pilot areas. Spoiler alert, I've mentioned them already. Who will be testing some of the principles behind the changes that we want to see. And then I'm going to focus on some of the opportunities that we might see when we start to integrate resilience into wider placemaking policies. So let's start at the top. Why are we doing this? I'm going to go back to the UK GRF and some of the things that Sonia said, because there's a really, really nice quote in there. It puts it nicely. It says, "We live in an increasingly volatile world, defined by geopolitical and geoeconomic shifts, rapid technological change, and a changing climate. This context, as Sonia said, means that crises will have far-reaching consequences and are likely to be greater in frequency and scale in the next decade than we've been used to." And then it says, "We have a responsibility to prepare for this future." I was a little flippant earlier. It's often been said, I was a little flippant earlier when I talked about being repeatedly headhunted back to deal with emergencies. But there's no denying that the events of recent years have repeatedly demonstrated the commitment and professionalism of those who work in the UK's resilience community. It's why I started off with a big thank you. And I've spoken to many LRF chairs and many of you over the past few years, and I don't think there's anyone in this audience who'll disagree that the role and expectation of LRFs have grown considerably. I mentioned COVID. I mentioned Brexit. Those are just 2 examples. Lucy mentioned Mighty Oak earlier. Anyone here take part in Mighty Oak? That might be my 4th apology, because the trend is likely to continue. Yeah, I was in that basement for 3 solid days of Mighty Oak, and I know why some of the recommendations came back the way that they did. But the trend is likely to continue. And that's why in the 2021 Integrated Review, the government made its first commitment to consider strengthening the role and responsibilities of LRFs. So how do we go about doing this? Well, that summer we held our first big resilience conversation. And it told us a lot of things about how LRFs thought things could be improved. We were told LRFs wanted to increase their capacity at all levels, including a transition towards permanent and dedicated functions. We were told chairs were frustrated because they didn't have the clear mandate, nor the levers that they needed to drive real change. We were told there could be more consistency and a more defined mechanism of local, national, multi, and single agency assurance, so standards could raise above the board. And there needed to be changes to funding, data, intelligence, and information flows. And now, despite what some of you might believe and my comments about ivory towers earlier, government doesn't work in a vacuum. And so in 2022, we also had the government's Levelling Up white paper. And with that came a renewed commitment to devolution and empowering local leaders to take the decisions they needed and wanted to take to improve the lives of their local communities and their local citizens. And all these things came together in the UK GRF. So here you see some of the things that Sonia's talked about already, the 3 core themes of the framework. We will have a shared understanding of the risks that we face. We will have a greater emphasis on preparing and preventing emergencies, and the whole of society will play their part in helping our communities be resilient. And here, on the right, how they relate to our commitments to strengthen LRFs. By 2025, we'll run a pilot in England across 3 pillars of reform. I told you these things always come in 3s. Leadership, accountability, and the integration of resilience into the UK's Levelling Up mission, and then roll them out by the end of the decade. Our vision for the strong LRF of the 2030s is an LRF that builds resilience in their communities and places, effectively manages risk, has empowered leadership, supported by a sustainably resourced team, and where that leadership is answerable and accountable to the communities that they serve. Now, I want to go into a little bit more detail in each of these over the course of the next 15 minutes or so. Strengthening each of these aspects will deliver some of the results that I said that LRF chairs wanted and were looking for in our big conversation. But when you put it together, these things become so much more. I called this talk Mainstreaming Resilience because a stronger LRF will ensure that resilience becomes so much more than just emergency planning and emergency management. And I've talked to so many people, including some of the people in this room today, who feel emergency planning is a bit of an unloved profession at times. Budgets are being cut, posts are being cut. People saying to me, and it's something that someone said to me earlier this year, Paul, it's all well and good having a plan in place. Do my partners have the people in post to exercise it? No. Mainstreaming resilience will mean that it has a higher profile, with a place's resilience seen as key to the economic and cultural success of the local area. So I'll tell you what the plan is, and I'll tell you how we're going to test it. So again, here's the three pillars of our reform: leadership, accountability, and the integration of resilience into placemaking. Now, we can talk about stronger leadership in two ways. Firstly, there's the leadership of the LRF itself. There are 38 LRFs across England, and each of them has their own style of professional leadership. And each way works in a way that's right for them. But there's one thing that most of them, if not all of them, have in common, and that's the LRF chair as a part-time role. Two things are important to remember here. First, remember what I said earlier. The big conversation told us that chairs wanted more capacity to do their jobs. Second, that line from the UK GRF that I shared earlier as well. Crises are becoming more complex, more frequent, demanding a lot more of your time and effort. So if we want to strengthen the resilience of our local areas, should the person be doing it as an add-on to their day job? Or should it be someone's full-time responsibility? Your council has a director for children's services, a director for public health. Is what's needed a model where you can have a director or an equivalent for local resilience as well? Well, that's what we're going to test. Evolving the position of chair into a full-time chief resilience officer with the heft and the clout to get things done. And they'll be responsible for the delivery of a resilience strategy, a document that says this is what's important for my local area. This is what we need to do. This is how each and every organisation within my area will help deliver it. And remember the core theme of the UK GRF that Zonia talked about earlier? This is how we'll prevent an emergency rocking our communities. This is how we'll be transparent and show you what we face. And this is how every single person in our communities, within our towns, within our villages, can play their part to make it happen. And they can't do it on their own. And this is where the second part of the leadership strand comes in, political leadership. Now, this time last year, we went around the country talking to local areas before the UK GRF was published, just testing some of the water about the way that we were thinking. And when we started talking about political leadership, there was a little bit of pushback from people in the room. You know, we do not want politicians involved in response. It was a very, very clear message, and that's true. But this is why it's important to separate emergency management from making sure, and emergency management in response, to building a resilient community. A more resilient community has its champions, people with the democratic authority to say, this is what is right for our local area. Someone who has knocked on thousands of doors, understands the wider context in which people go about their lives. People who shout about the work of emergency planning, even when most of your work goes behind closed doors. Now again, talking to a lot of people over the past year, hearing what people will say. People will say, you know, I already report to a council member. We already have that link to a democratic leader. But this will be different. We're talking about stronger leadership across multi-agency boundaries, cooperation between councils and, yes, political parties across lots of the country on how to make the area more resilient to acute and chronic shocks. Now, I'll come on to what this might look like in a moment, but it brings me on to the second pillar here, which is all about accountability. So if this new Chief Resilience Officer and their team delivers a resilience strategy, how can we monitor its effectiveness? How can partners be held to account for pulling their weight? And if a democratically elected leader makes a promise to their electorate, how can they themselves be accountable for delivering it? So taken together, stronger leadership, stronger accountability will lead to the integration of resilience as a concept in every town, village, and city across the country. And that's the really exciting part that I'll come on to next. We asked LRFs to consider what they wanted to pilot, whether they wanted to pilot some of these ideas, and 22 of them did. A Chief Resilience Officer, one said, would increase accountability and visibility of resilience activities whilst maintaining individual authority and multi-agency approaches, creating maximum flexibility to take work forward. Another saw an opportunity to develop an agreed strategy for strengthening local resilience, with multiple cultures and contributions brought together and aligned under a single leadership team, motivated and driven by a Chief Resilience Officer. One LRF wanted the opportunities to grapple with the challenges that working with 14 different local authorities brings. You know, a really, really complex political space. Would it be possible to get consistency and consensus on a long-term resilience strategy when your local area is so diverse, both in diversity of area and place, but also diversity of political thinking? This isn't going to be easy, and we're up for the challenge. We whittled down these expressions of interest and invited 8 LRFs to work with us on the pilot plans, and those were the LRFs I said hello to at the start. So that's Thames Valley, Cumbria, Gloucestershire, West Mercia, Northumbria, Greater Manchester, London, and Suffolk. Now, each of them are now looking at the challenges and opportunities the pilots present. What would they like to do? How much would it cost them? How can we help to provide them with the resources that they need to test some of the ideas that they want to go off and do? Now, we've brainstormed together a couple of different scenarios that I'll come on to now. And I'm glad that I'm fixed with a microphone here, because I do tend to get a little bit weather map when I go onto slides and start to poke at things here. So we've talked about how they can use their CRO. Someone who can spend more time building relationships with, I'm going to try and see if the laser works. Yes, I'm so excited. Someone who can use their experience to build relationships with sort of like chief executives of councils, elected representatives, council leaders, all of you working within the LRF as well, business groups, community representatives, central government, so you have a stronger voice to us in DLUC and the people who can represent you to ministers, a stronger voice directly to ministers. That exceptional voice for an LRF at the highest levels you can get. We talked about how that they can ensure every partner is pulling their weight, escalating to each responder if they feel that more can be done, influencing the direction in which they collectively travel. Now, the key thing for me here, and the really exciting thing for me, is developing that strong resilience strategy for each area and making sure that they can build a team to deliver it. So on the one hand, you've got your team of emergency planners here. You've got your team who are collectively working, doing what they need to do, what you need to do to fulfill the current functions under the CCA, to prepare for emergencies, to respond, to recover. However, with the new focus and that fourth aspect, mitigation, prevention, some of our pilots are looking at whether the unique challenges of the LRF and the ambitions that they have require a more unique and bespoke approach. So some of them are looking at bringing in different people, with a focus on specializing in different challenges. You might have someone dedicated to increasing the resilience of local businesses, for example, so that your local economy can do more preventative work along that strand. You could have someone embedded in your local authority's environmental sustainability team. In areas where you have particular challenges with the sector, you could resource a post dedicated to working with them to improve the integration of resilience that benefits the wider area. What this means, and what these people down here can help us to achieve, is resilience being part of that wider focus, not just emergency planning, but resilience as mainstream. And this is why it matters. And it does. If we get this right, if we have a stronger leadership where it counts, there'll be stronger voice at both official and political levels, championing resilient communities. There'll be a clear and transparent resilience strategy, setting out local priorities, with a team in place to deliver them and being held accountable for doing so. There'll be a stronger voice to engage with us at a national level, and so shape the ability of local areas to implement the framework. Our pilots are looking at different ways that they can strengthen their accountability. And I mentioned that we've picked areas that aren't necessarily easy on how to do that. So that area with 14 different councils I mentioned earlier, they're looking at a committee-style system over here. Each council nominating a councillor and a committee to sit and agree the priorities that the CRO will deliver and then hold them to account in that way. Anyone that's seen a minister report to a select committee knows that this kind of system can properly drive results. The middle example here, some of our pilots have a simpler structure in place. So a more direct line of accountability between your elected representative, who are in the little polygons, shapes, CRO, and the team that sits behind them. Some of our pilots have metro mayors. London, for example, has a deputy mayor with the responsibility for resilience. So a more delegated form of accountability might be right in some areas. And one of our pilots is looking at a more active role for a chair of an SCG, who has to implement all of the planning and the preventative work, and who themselves is accountable to a locally elected leader. And the more you think about this, the more important political representation matters in highlighting everything that needs to be done to keep a community safe and resilient. We heard an LRF needs more authority when partners can't pull their weight. Elected representatives are very, very good at shining a light on where things go wrong. And no one champions that local community like their elected representative. I gave a version of this talk, a much simplified version of this talk, to an LRF during the local government elections, whilst people were canvassing on the television behind me. And you just get struck by the passion that's being shared and the willingness to say, this is what matters to the people who I represent. And we've seen the power in the media of that elected representative as well, to make sure the voice of a community is heard when it needs to be, not only by local partners, but again by government ministers, and that direct line between the central systems and the local systems that underpin it. Put simply, powerful elected representatives have a voice and more levers to get things done. A voice an LRF can use, a voice local resilience professionals can use to get things done. So we'll see a clarity of local priorities with a mandate to deliver, champions of community resilience, that shared understanding of risk we keep on coming back to, and that powerful voice where it counts. So to conclude, I said that if we get stronger leadership and stronger democratic accountability, we'll see that integration of resilience into all aspects of placemaking policy. Now, how will that happen? Well, a councillor with a mandate to ensure you've got that resilient community sits on so many different panels. They'll sit on your environmental panel, they'll sit on your housing panel, they'll sit on your health, economic growth, all of those different committees, and that voice is powerful. I've seen it in government. Our ministers sit on different cabinet committees, and as I said right at the start, the voice of DLUC spreads throughout all of those committees. They are representative. They champion local communities in every single one. A resilient strategy with defined goals creates that whole of society approach, clear accountability where everyone plays their part, and a team focused on delivering it. One LRF considered dedicating a member of staff to ensuring cabinet decisions take into account impact on resilience, having a little box that influences and informs a cabinet before it makes a decision. Those are the kind of ideas that people are talking about. Another considered making an LRF a statutory consultee for certain applications, a self-funding system to ensure that consolidated approach across the piece. Again, we're not talking about emergency planning in its own, in a niche. We're talking about holistic resilience, mainstreamed resilience, where everyone has their part to play, where risks are known, talked about and prevented, where resilience is key to economic growth and the priorities of our elected leaders. So this is my challenge to you as I wrap up. Be bold.
Yes.
Think of new and innovative ways you can deliver the framework in your own way. If you're in a pilot area, think about how you can get involved. If you're not, don't wait. You've seen our priorities. You think you know where we're going to go over the next 10 years and beyond. You know the core themes in the UK GRF, a focus on prevention, a shared understanding of risk, everyone empowered to do their part. What can you do now? I opened by saying the UK GRF is probably the most exciting thing to happen since the CCA. I truly, truly believe that. And we're only at the beginning. We need your help to create a movement that revitalizes resilience and makes it core to everything that we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There's some water there. Thank you very much, Paul. That is what we needed right there. Bottled hope. Thank you very much, Sonia. Please come and join us. And Nathan and I, through the power of our kind of chemistry and intuition, will work the room now. So we're going to have some facilitated conversation. Don't laugh, Jeannie. It's real. Facilitated conversation. Please think about your question. I'd like to hear lots of questions. And in a wonderful act of very clever programme planning, we have time for questions. So let's use it well. One thing, while people are thinking and composing and putting their hands up and letting Nathan get to, one thing I loved so much about that, and you can tell because I tweeted all the way through it, I love so much about that, but one of the things I think Paul is telling us is that he's going to help us build roots. Yeah. Because I think one of the hardest things to sit through this week is how easily we get swept away in an incident, and perhaps somebody looking to be cool, or somebody, as I say in the book, with the scrambled eggs on their epaulets turns up and sweeps the existing plans away. And we're all about roots there, and thank you for that.
Oh, you can see it. Is this on?
Yeah.
Hey. Those are the first words that anyone on the panel ever says. But I think you can see that in the way that resilience has grown over the last 10 years in central government as well. So I talked about being in resilience and emergencies division at the start in whatever we were called back then, where we were just a team of government liaison officers, resilience advisors, and a small emergency management team, which I was in, trying to create that boundary. And then we've grown into a whole directorate. My directorate focuses on the implementation of the UK GRF and maintains that link between central and national government. But you have that separate divisions now looking at long-term resilience policy, looking at the strategic direction of the central UK and how it should be implemented at that local level. And Sonia, you've literally just done exactly the same thing now, because we felt the same. Every single time an emergency happened, we got swept away, and we had to pause different aspects. And that's why you've now got the different COBRA unit and the resilience directorate. So you can see that mirrored across central government.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Questions, please. Don't do that thing. Don't make me come out. But yes.
Bill Crocker from the West Country. Is the future Labour government signed up to this?
Um, the future of local government, what we're seeing in the Levelling Up White Paper is a commitment to improve devolution at every level and to give people more control, more direct oversight of what is important to them. So the new deeper devolution deals that we've got, all of that is about giving people more control over their local lives. And elephant in the room, there will be an election at some point in the next 14 months or so. But I think every political party is committed to future devolution of local government. And when we talk to councillors, when we talk to local government, that ability, as we've seen, to be able to prepare for what might happen so that if the worst does happen and you have an emergency that impacts your local area, you can bounce back. And you can bounce back quickly. You know, you've seen in Cornwall how taking out one train line impacts the economic success and makes a real difference to the economic viability of that local area. If you've got metro mayors, for example, in the West Midlands, in Manchester, you know, wanting people to come and invest in their local area, who want to draw local businesses, local homes, make their local communities thrive, they need to have a resilient community. And giving them more powers and more say in making sure that they can attract new business, new investment, new families into their local area. It's all the same thing. And that's what I mean when I talk about mainstreaming resilience. We're not talking about, you know, putting extra burdens on local government. We are talking about making it absolutely clear that a healthy, thriving community is one that's resilient to shocks, one that prepares for emergencies, not just one that prevents emergencies from occurring in the first place, rather than preventing known risks.
Any more questions, please?
Tracy Navarre from North Wales. Can I just ask, will this be rolled out to the devolved governments?
The UK GRF is a UK framework. What I've been talking about is English LRFs, but as a department, we work really, really closely with our devolved neighbours. So how the devolved administrations want to implement the UK GRF in their own way will be a matter for them, and we do work really, really closely with them. The pilots that I've been talking about are England only.
Yeah. So we work very closely with DA colleagues when we were developing the UKRF to do that. Some elements are, and actually it says very clearly through the framework, bits which are going to be adopted and bits which will work in alignment, because of course, you know, we're stronger in working than those cross-border things. So definitely, thank you.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you spend many years with emergency planning thinking actually what difference it can make. And then when you go into a pandemic living 2 miles either side of the Welsh-English border and going to Tesco's is illegal, you suddenly realise it is very important. So, yeah, that's a brilliant question. Thank you. I think there was a very smart chap just right there. Thank you.
Harrison Maxwell, Blackburn with Darwin. I'll apologise to the room in the first instance because I'm relatively new to emergency planning. In fact, today is my second day with Enroll.
Welcome.
So the question may be a little bit simplistic. There's been a lot of conversations around community engagement. We want greater community engagement, greater community involvement, and community understanding of risk, which I think is great. But if I give one of the examples of when I worked in the private sector, we had a risk of protest, and we created a massive plan to mitigate that protest, and we made sure that all the colleagues within the area were fully engaged with it. And the protesters then found that plan, and were notified of that plan, and then mitigated against it. And so actually we ended up in a considerably worse position because they knew our weaknesses, for want of better. How do you plan, or how can we plan on managing that engagement with the community while also ensuring that in a world of potential greater civil unrest, we mitigate against those who want to do us harm finding out about those potential risks and exploiting them?
Shall I take that one? It is a challenge, and as I've mentioned, in publishing the latest National Risk Register, we want to be as transparent as possible so that people can plan for themselves. But equally, we're very conscious of potential hostile state actors and others who may do us harm too. So I think there's the basic levels of where we're on safe ground of giving people advice to things that they can do to prepare for themselves. Have some bottled water, think about wind up radios and torches, and and be aware of the risks in your area. And then there's areas when we'll have elements of our planning where we'll need to keep those to ourselves. Not least some of them can be GDPR, or the safety of our staff and our people. So we don't need to publish everything, and that's the reason we can't publish everything. But there's then it's working collectively and taking advice on the grey area parts of that, from security experts, from policing colleagues, from others, about where we think we may be straying too much into giving too much away, I suppose. So one of the ones that we're grappling on at the moment will be some of our capability assessments of how ready we are. We obviously want to share that with lots of colleagues in this room and to help LRF planning and help other planning. But, clearly there's a spectrum there where we really are, drawing attention to areas where we've got vulnerabilities where people could then try and do us harm or undermine that capability, just as you said. So I'm afraid there's no easy answer to that, but as with most of the things we do, it's talking to experts, talking to each other, and working that through. Thank you. Or any other better ideas in the audience, also welcome.
We've got a question here and then one over there. So if I do this one first.
Yeah, hi, Chris Samuel from Cheshire. There's been a couple of mentions of Exercise Mighty Oak by both speakers, and there was obviously the report at a national level came out with the findings from the exercise. I just wonder if there's any news on any, how those findings are being taken forward, anything that we might expect to see coming out centrally that to address some of the common themes that came out of that exercise report at all. Just any updates on that front, please?
Miles, you've got anything?
I mean, the recommendation that struck me most, having been in the room and chairing RESTGs and trying to work out our policies in the heat of the moment, was what I was talking about earlier about expectations of LRFs are super high. And so one of the things that we're doing will be to actually take that and look at our pilot areas. So we're going to be taking some of the findings of Mighty Oak and then just exploring, okay, so if government continues to have super strong and unrealistic expectations of LRFs, what is the appropriate model going forward? If government will still expect an LRF to do things, that comes at a cost, government. And so one of the things that we are doing in our pilot is just exploring what that will be in the future. And then one of the things that the UK GRF does commit to is exploring the future funding mechanism and just looking at, okay, how should local resilience be funded in the future? So that's the one thing that struck me from the recommendations, and actually being the person that says to my team, okay, you now need to phone 38 local resilience forums on that single telephone over there and ask them to find a playing field that a chopper can land in. That's the thing that struck me, and that's one of the things that we'll be taking forward, I think, at that local level. Don't know whether you've got any.
So more broadly, nationally, of course, there's lots of big recommendations in there, aren't there, and difficult ones and expensive ones to look at. So departments and across the piece are looking at those and thinking about that kind of balance investment. So there's lots of work going on looking at water, and Mighty Oak is one of the drivers, but of course, the events in Surrey and water's disruption, just at the weekend, and others around, that spectrum of improving those arrangements and how far to go. And as Paul said, some of that is, investment in, secure communications, crisis communications, but also it needs a lot of investment in time and energy for us all as a community to think about those local plans and think about what information do we need to get in every individual's hands as well. So there's lots of looking at the huge breadth of challenges there and thinking about, right, where are our priorities? Where are we going to most shift the dial? Where are the practical ones? So definitely, we're coming out and talking in more detail when we've done a bit of that difficult thinking. So thank you.
There's a hand over here somewhere. Yes.
Thank you. My name's Emma Dodgson. I work for Essex County Council's emergency planning team. I really enjoyed your presentation, thank you. And you spoke about resilience lots of times. I think that the term was mentioned. I've got a question about resilience, but in the context of mental health and well-being, and that's of people affected, survivors, bereaved, families, children, communities, and also the responders. So I just wondered how the framework's going to address the investment and upskilling that the organisations that often have to pick up the pieces are going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So important work in, organisationally. We've had lots of, colleagues and responders who have been through extraordinary difficult times and relentlessly difficult times over recent years. And so how we are as organisations supporting each other and ourselves, but also very much in the framework working with voluntary and charity sectors and communities and health colleagues around that kind of mental health provision and challenges that we know exist on every day, never mind, when we also have a crisis or emergency, but also some of the, amazing skills and capabilities and awareness and networks that we can also tap into with the voluntary sector. There's been some good work with the Victims of Terrorism Unit, and I think you've got some discussions around human aspects later on as well, which will play through. I think so. It's one definitely. Aware of, very conscious of, and building that more into the National Risk Register, for example, we're building for the first time, thinking around. We always had anxiety and outrage as part of the criteria, but also as physical health, but also mental health as some of the criteria. So really building into all of those stages, as well as how we can improve some of the support that's available, bring that together, and be thinking about that in the early stages. But I think also the long-term challenges then are building capacity, across the piece, aren't they? In services which we know already stretched to be able to also help with emergencies. So I think it's one definitely on the radar. There's bits at all levels of all of the phases, but one definitely where there's more to do, and be interesting to hear from the discussions later on as well about where some of that work and that Julie and others are doing. Thank you.
Hi there, it's Libby Tassell, Worcester County Council Emergency Planning. Thank you very much. I echo, actually, Emma's just stolen some of my thunder there of one of my questions, and actually one of the other one was about funding as well, so I'll move forward with that one. Both excellent presentations and absolute music to my ears. I too have been in emergency planning for 25 years now. In fact, I joined during the floods of 1998. It hasn't stopped flooding in Worcestershire since. It's not my fault, I promise. But I just from a funding perspective, because let's get down to that business. I mean, it's really, really important that we actually have the funds to back us up. Now, when I joined, we were Home Office and we had a ring fence grant or whatever it was called back then. And I know, that when we do have a ring fence grant for money and funds, that money is utilised in the way that it should be utilised and not poached for anything else. So I just wonder if there's anything that you can say with reference to that, because actually it's fantastic. I mean, I welcome all of what you've said, but there is, at a time when organisations are really struggling, obviously I'm local authority in public health, and, more than any that, we are absolutely struggling. We can see that, ahead for the next 2 years, but what would beyond that? And then something like this, there is a huge amount of finances and that's involved to deliver something like this, which A, I welcome, but B, how are we going to do it? Because, sadly, I think, well, actually, I won't say sadly, because I think we are a part of a profession who it's not about the paycheck. It's because we want to deliver, because we're passionate about, the work that we do for our communities. Thank you.
Funding. I knew somebody would ask me. I was just saying, okay, which one of you is going to ask me about funding? We're going to look at it. is the answer. I can't give you any easy answer. The way that the government works is that funding is locked by the Treasury. We have to negotiate with them for the use of public funds and make sure that happens in cycles. What I would say is there are two aspects of it. Firstly, the pilots that are going on at the moment are not only a test about how policy should work in the future, but again, how should things be funded in the future? What works? What's that capacity needed? When we talk about increasing the capability and the capacity of building local resilience, what does that look like, and what do we need? So the pilots are themselves an important part of this business case. And one of the reasons why we're actually putting our pilot areas a little bit through the ringer at the moment is to properly test. Because if we cannot get the evidence in the Treasury, will not be able to give us any money. Because, as a government, resources are what they are. In terms of ring-fenced funding, again, I think it comes down to local areas knowing how to spend their own resources and prioritize that. That said, our policy team is looking at the future policy model of how local resilience should be funded, and they will be looking at every single aspect of how it should be done, and the pilots are just one way of building that evidence up. So no easy answers, no immediate answers, but it is something that we are actively looking at for for all of the reasons that you've said.
Yeah. And just to add, I think it'll be true, whatever happens, in the election, next year, that it will be tough financially for whoever's coming in. So even though we've got the sense from all parties that they're interested and investing in resilience and want to do more, we're going to have some difficult choices and trade-offs inevitably. So I think that's, for me, where it's important about how we can collectively build that evidence base, build that direction of travel, get that understanding of where we can best invest or shift that dial. But also, I think, and that's the interesting trade-off with ring fences, can absolutely see the benefit of doing it, but also where we want to get into that prevention side of it as well. So it's trying to look at it holistically across the piece where we can attack this too. So as Paul said, no easy answers as I'm sure you're expecting, but I think definitely getting that sense of that we need to invest more, and if we can't, then actually understanding where are the risks that we are carrying and where we can best target that, I think is the key important thing we can all work on together.